My name's Harold Berrow. I was born in New Westminster. I was raised in Port Moody, which was a sawmill town with lots of tugboats going back and forth, bringing logs into the inlet. When I was 14, I used to go as a ride-along kind of deckhand for Baird's Towing, who serviced the sawmill at Flavel Cedar. Later on, I got the urge that I wanted to go to sea eventually, and one day I went down to the inlet. We lived fairly close by the water, and there was a big tugboat that had got caught in low tide and was sitting on the shore. Guys were working furiously to keep it propped up, and right then, when I seen that boat, I knew that I wanted to work on the water. Anyway, when I was 14, I used to get the bus into New Westminster, and I'd go down on the docks there, and I would go aboard some of the ships that were loading lumber. Anyway, years later, that was another thing that made my desire to work on the water. Anyway, in 1959, I left school and went to work for Texada Towing in Vancouver. I had to fly up to Powell River, and a cab was waiting for me to take me up to Lund, which is the end of the highway there. I got a grocery order in the store. They had 2 cases of beer, and away I went when the tug came in. It was quite an experience working with these guys. You know, they used to tease me and get me doing things that were just out of this world. Anyway, after I was not a greenhorn anymore, I stayed working for that company, and eventually went to work on the motor vessel Harrow, which was towing logs from up coast. I actually worked on the boat twice, in the early 60s, and then later on in the mid-60s I went to work on the Harrow. Eventually I was sent up to Tassus to work on a small tug up there. We towed logs from 11 camps into Tassus and a place called Sandpoint, where the logs were sorted. I stayed on the boat until about 6 years after I got married. Then I went on the water to do boom work, which was on Gambier Island. My wife and I lived there for 5 years. 1970, I went ashore and moved to Cowichan Lake on the island and bought some property there and started into a different career of logging and a bit of milling. So anyway, that's kind of what it was. Well, I had my business there for 13 years in Cowichan Lake on the island here, and I decided I wanted to do something else. So my original idea was to come up to Campbell River where I had relatives, and I hoped to buy a small tug and go to work for myself. As it turned out, there was too many tugs here already and not enough business at the time. That was in 1986. From there, I purchased a crab boat. It was a 37-foot ferrule, a fiberglass boat made by a famous guy, and I started crab fishing up in the Broughton, which is across over in the mouth of Knight's Inlet. I worked crab fishing for 10 years there, and eventually I sold my boat and moved. I had a little float house there that I had built, but I sold that also, and I moved back into Campbell River, and Yeah, I don't know what to say now, because I actually went back logging up in Butte Inlet. I was there working for like roughly 6 months out of every year, doing boom work there. It was quite an interesting place. Not a place you want to be in after the month of October, because the wind starts up there and the cold starts coming down the river. And one time I was there for 65 days before I got home, and it was into December, and it was snowing every day. It was freezing cold. And you should know better when you see the ducks and all the birds starting to fly out of the river mouth, because they know what's coming. Anyway, then I retired at age 65 and took up my hobby of building tugboats, only tugboats that were built and worked on the coast here in British Columbia. Well, I've done extensive reading about the wood tugboat industry. You know, steam tugs were our first tugboats on the coast here, and you know, the thing was the drawings for them. Once the boat was built, the drawings just disappeared. Nobody wanted them anymore because they had the real thing. Very hard to find. But the Harrow, when I decided to build it, I found out that in Fort Eustis, Virginia, is the American Army Museum, and I contacted them, and they actually sent me the drawings for the Harrow. During the Second World War, they built lots of boats in the United States for the American Army. Which moved most of the infrastructure for all the other forces. One of the other boats that I built, the Chieftain III, is a local boat. It was built in Vancouver. In the early 60s, they were building these boats to tow logs on the coast here. Most of them were around 1,000 horsepower, some of them less. The boats were built of steel, but they still had the lines of the old wooden boats except for the hull. They built quite a number of those boats. Some of them were called hot rods because they had big power and small vessels. To tow 72 sections, you need 1,000 horse or more to move those big booms. But today, that's kind of all in the past. A lot of it was done over the years by log barges. There was lots of barges that size that moved logs. They were self-loading, self-dumping, and towards the 2000s, they started to make changes again into getting out of log barging on a big scale like they used to do, because the profit margin just wasn't there anymore. The main wood that I use is yellow cedar, or called cypress. That wood grows here in BC, and it grows above a good yellow cedar grows above the 2,000 foot level. I used to get it from the dryland sorts. Anyway, the wood has to be dried good. It has to be sawn. It has to be planed. I use 2-inch, and I build a block of wood, and that's how my models start. I have the drawings, and I have to loft all of the drawings in order to make it work. The vessels in the end the hull part is hollowed completely out, very thin. I use wooden red cedar pegs in order to keep my thickness even. All the housework that goes on the boats is usually aircraft veneer. It's very thin, different sizes. nice to work with, but I do use some yellow cedar for cabins, mainly for like wheelhouses, because I can bandsaw shapes of the wheelhouses. The Canadian National Number 2 was originally called the St. Catherine. It was built in 1918 at the end of the First World War. It was finished in 1919. Vancouver Harbour's Commission was looking for a fireboat. They went over to England and they purchased this vessel, and it was brand new. They sailed it back. It's a steam tug of 130 feet long. Anyway, they kept the vessel for 2 years and found that it was costing too much to keep. The vessel had never really done any firework, dock fires or anything. Eventually, it was sold to Canadian Northern Railway, which was the railway that came in from northern Alberta to Prince Rupert, BC. The tug towed railcar barges from Victoria's Inner Harbor right up until the early 1960s. Eventually, the tug was sold to Capital Iron in Victoria to be scrapped. The company that I had worked for in the early 60s, Texada Towing, heard about it, and they went over and they purchased it from Capital Iron. They towed it over to the Pacific Tanker Dock in Vancouver Harbor and started to work on it. I'm not quite sure of the date when it was finished, but it was somewhere around 1963. Anyway, they wanted to turn this vessel into an ocean towing tug to tow ships to Japan for scrapping or any type of ocean towing. Its lifespan with Texada was fairly short. It actually cost the company to go out of the business, and eventually another company took it over and used it to tow log barges with for several years. In the early 80s, it sat tied up in a waterway on the Fraser River and eventually was towed down to Tacoma and was scrapped there at General Metals. That's the end of that. This model, like all the rest, most of them are made from a solid block. I loft the drawings and carve the hull. All the deck fittings, all the anchor winches, stuff like that, I all make from parts. Some of it is from fax machines, the gears. All the rest is made by hand. Just about everything now on tugboats that I build is done by hand. Generally, when I start a boat, I have a tugboat logbook, and every day that I work in my shop on a certain vessel, I enter my hours. Sometimes I forget, but roughly this boat here is the longest I've ever worked on a model. It has roughly 1,400 hours in it. I don't purchase very much stuff any longer. I am able to make most of my own fittings and stuff. So consequently, it just takes more time to do that, you know. In 1986, I started building just tugboats. The only other thing that I built over the years was a 3-masted schooner rig. one that used to haul lumber off the coast here to ports all over the world. Those schooners that were called lumber ships just moved lumber down sometimes to California or around to the East Coast. Everything was done by sail and took very long to move the product. The last tugboat that I built for a company was eventually the original vessel was purchased by Lafarge Cement Company in Delta, and the actual model of that tugboat was a tug that my son used to run that was under contract to Lafarge Cement. And eventually, the company, Lafarge Cement, purchased the vessel from the owner and is today working steady for them, towing their cement products. My son is the youngest son, is the only one that has kind of followed in some of my footsteps. He became a master when he was roughly 24 years old, and today he runs a tug called the Tagloo, which used to be called the Arctic Tagloo, that did work up in the Arctic. It's a vessel of 115 feet and over 2,000 horsepower. It's nice to see, because at the Maritime Centre here, the odd time I see him going by towing log barges from either the Queen Charlottes or from Prince William Island up in Alaska. So it's kind of nice to see that some of it's still being continued by my family member.